These are Nebraska corn farmers. They work in acres, not hours, harvesting the energy and climate solutions the world needs.
Tomorrow's soy industry depends on the actions we take today. The future is here, and the time to move is now.
Market Journal Television for Agricultural Business Decisions is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources in partnership with the Nebraska Rural Radio Association. Promotional support provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine and partial funding provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
Well, hi everyone. I'm Bryce Duskett, and thank you very much for joining us today here on Market Journal. Planting season continues to be in full swing all across the heartland, and on today's broadcast, we'll be checking in with a young producer to hear how things are going out and in his field. We also had a chance to get a tour of the new robotics center at the heart of Reinke manufacturing. We'll take you behind the scenes to see what's next when it comes to irrigation technology. Unfortunately, a lot of Nebraska producers already getting those pivots rolling here as part of the 2025 growing season. Darin Fessler is set to join us a little bit later with a look at what's moving the markets, and Eric Hunt standing by with your weekly weather forecast. All of that is coming up this week on Market Journal, but let's begin the broadcast right here. Late last week, our team made a stop outside of Hampton to catch up with a local producer to see how things are coming when it comes to his planting season. Here's what Mitch Oswald had to say about his planting progress. Give us an update on how things are going thus far for your operation. When did you guys get started planting?
We started corn here at the beginning of this week. We got beans done the week before. So yeah, my dad and I have both been just kind of hammering away at getting some corn in the ground now this week. Hopefully the weather cooperates, be done first of next week, hopefully. So
fingers crossed, we'll see.
Fingers crossed, yeah.
Let's back up. Tell me a little about the farming operation. You referenced your dad.
Yep. So me and my dad, I'm a 6th generation farmer on our farm. We just farm west of Aurora over to Henderson, kind of in between there. My brother helps when he can, and then my wife and I, 3 kids at home. So she's active in the operation as well. So yeah, we're grateful to have everybody involved.
Seems like folks will do things a little different depending on where you're at in the state, but you guys started on soybeans, then switched to corn. Is that your typical flow?
Yeah, so typically the last few years we've switched and have run beans first, just to get them in the ground and out of the way kind of. We like to get started with soybeans for harvest earlier. We do some seed corn stuff as well, so start beans and then we can get corn going, so that way when they call for seed corn to be planted, we can jump over and do that without having to switch from beans over to corn. So yeah, we switched and started doing that here a couple years ago and have been really happy with it. So
last year here on the show we featured the seed corn harvest process, but we haven't really talked about planting before. When does seed corn usually go in the ground?
So we work with Syngenta, and they typically start kind of toward the end of April, beginning part of May, and they'll run all the way through the first part of June. So last year we were planting, I think, on the 4th or 5th of June, finishing up for some seed corn stuff, which obviously translate to late September, early October harvest for them. So yeah, they're kind of all over the board from May to June.
And they'll use their own custom harvesting crew to pick those fields, but you'll use your planters to plant the corn, right?
Yep. We just got to set them up a little different. Shut different rows off and lift them up out of the ground so it's planting how they're patterned once. And so yeah, it's an interesting season to be planting seed corn for sure.
The story of the past 2 years, maybe 3 years at this point, has been the dry conditions all across Nebraska impacting the western corn belt. There were some scattered showers here May 1st as you and I were visiting over the past couple of days. Did you catch any meaningful rain here?
No, that's why we're able to continue planting. Unfortunately, our area for some reason has just kind of been in that area that we usually miss anything substantial. We had, I think it was 8 to 10 days ago now, we had like 30 hundredths, I think was what we had.
I remember last year I was surprised to see how many pivots were going before seed was out of the ground. It seems to be a theme again here in 2025. Did you guys have to do that last year, thinking about it here this year again?
Last year we got really lucky. We didn't have to water anything out of the ground. I know this year there's a lot of guys that I know of that are trying to plant, spray, and irrigate at the same time, trying to water in herbicide, water in fertilizer, and get seed out of the ground. So fortunately, we haven't had to turn any pivots on yet. Our days are coming, I'm guessing, just by looking at the forecast. But yeah, I know there's guys that are trying to manage all three right now, and that's no easy task, I know that.
You can pinpoint, there's a lot of challenges for young producers today getting started back on a farming operation. You can pinpoint one that's been the biggest hurdle for you and your family to overcome. What's that been?
Goodness. Well, we live in a really competitive area. And so you have areas that have higher cash rents. And so when you're trying to get into it, you got to find the right fit for landlords and people that are willing to work with younger producers. I was fortunate that I had a great landlord that I took advantage of the state tax program where they got a tax incentive for helping out a young producer. And so that's how I got my start farming. But if you didn't have that, you have to be really competitive with rent rates and try to find ways to set yourself apart outside of price, which is really difficult.
Thanks to Mitch for having us out on his operation. Now, if you'd like to let us know how things are progressing when it comes to your neck of the woods, our team would love to stop by and visit with you. We invite you to drop us a line, an email that is, at marketjournal@unl.edu. Back in 1954, Richard Reinke started his business on a family farm manufacturing structural components for farm and commercial buildings, with a focus then on chicken houses and laminated rafters. By the late 1960s, Reinke introduced the electrogator center pivot irrigation system, and the company has been a staple in irrigation ever since. We recently sat down with the president of Reinke Incorporated to talk about how this company is continuing to push innovation in manufacturing and irrigation technology. All right, let's back up a little bit. Tell me as much, I guess, high level, the history of Reinke Manufacturing.
Sure.
From day one, you guys have been serving this area, building in this area of the state, but serving now a worldwide audience.
Correct. Reinke Manufacturing is a family-held corporation, been that way since its inception. Richard Reinke founded the company back in the 50s. We started making our first irrigation systems in the late 1960s, and it's been our primary product since then. Once he figured out, he was the world's first to come out with electric drive, rubber tires, reversible pivot, those kinds of things. And so he was kind of the founder of a lot of what you see out in the field today. So started making in the 1960s, and just kept building and getting better and doing that stuff for the last 50 years or so.
As you look at your time with the company, started in the late 1990s, but over the years, what have been some of the key things that have made Reinke stand out?
Well, we were the first to come out with GPS, and that's a big deal. So you can control your swing arm corners, you can control your end guns, all those developments with GPS, so that was a big one. We were also first to come out with the touchscreen main control panel, so that's another technology advancement that we came out with. And so obviously that's a big thing. So it makes it a lot easier for the grower to go up and just touch buttons on the main control panel so they can turn things on or off or whatever they're doing that particular day. So those are some of the things. When we're designing stuff, Bryce, the big thing that we always want to make sure we're paying attention to is it easier for the grower? They're getting bigger, they're going faster, they need to make things work easier for them. So that's one design criteria we always have is it easier for the grower? So that's a big thing for us. That's one of Richard's big things too, and so we continue to build on that. You got to make it common sense, make it easy, make it simple, and make it rugged. Those are the big design criteria that we use.
Humble beginnings.
Oh, yes.
But this has grown to become quite the manufacturing facility. Our camera guys, as we were pulling in here, said, wow, I think we made it.
Yes.
This is Reinke. This is a full-on manufacturing plant, though, and I think it would surprise some people that from day one you have stayed true to the mission of being here in this part of the state. I'm sure there's some efficiencies to moving operations to more of where an affordable workforce is, but why has the company chosen to remain here?
Well, this is home, one. We're family held, so this is where home is for the family. But it's also, I think it helps keep us to our roots. And so again, a lot of us are small town farm kids from Kansas and Nebraska, and that's a big thing for us. And so being here, it just keeps us in our roots versus being in a bigger city where you can kind of, certainly they do good work, but it keeps us understanding what ag is because, we're going to church, and we're talking to farmers at different events, things like that. And it just helps us understand the use case and what they're kind of wanting. So I think that's a big reason why we're here.
Let's talk about how you manufacture these pivots that you ship now all across the world. You recently announced a $12 million investment in robotics in particular. How much of the process of building a pivot today is done robotically with robotic welders and the such?
Well, a lot of it is obviously with the pipe cell. All of our water pipe is robotically welded. It was robotically welded before, but it was a pipe cell that was put in 2007. Obviously, technology's changed, technology improved, and so we wanted to incorporate that, and so that's why we needed to come out with a new pipe cell. We also do a lot of our hooks and receivers robotically. A lot of our base beams are welded robotically. We have some assembly processes that are done automatically, and so there's a lot more of that. A lot of that has to do with one, you can go a little faster, you're a little bit more efficient, but you also got labor resources. Everybody, if you talk to anybody across the country, they're always saying trying to find enough people is always an issue. So what we try to do is we try to automate certain things. I've been asked this before, so when you put in a robot, are you displacing workers? Absolutely not. What we're doing is we're taking good employees and we're upskilling them into a better job. So what we'll do, like specifically on this new pipe cell, we will send them off to training so they understand how to run this robot, which actually then gets them into a better job. We weren't able to find enough individuals anyway, so all we're trying to do is we're trying to upskill them into a better job.
Now, coming up next week, we'll be following up on this story with a look at how Reinke is investing in local communities from early childhood education to high school welding shops, all to help them build a strong, skilled workforce for their future. Well, it is now time to turn our attention over to the grain markets. There has been a buzz in the air this week when it comes to the U.S. and trading partners, in particular, a China delegation meeting set to be held in Switzerland. That gave the grain markets a little bit of a boost. Then on Thursday, the president made an announcement alongside UK about the future of that trading partnership. To talk about all this news, we were joined on Thursday morning by Darin Fessler. He's with Lakefront Futures and Options. Darin, I think it makes the most sense to start today's conversation on trade because here, as you and I are visiting, the president set to announce a trade deal with the UK. We also have the possibility of the U.S. and China sitting down for trade talks. Do you think the market has factored in these trade deals, these potentials, or is there a lot of upward potential in the grain markets?
Well, obviously the trade talks with China, obviously the biggest competitor we have for a lot of trade and economics, it create a lot of nervousness. Now, again, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot that comes out this weekend. President has already said we're going to leave those 145% tariffs in place for now. It's just what type of concessions will China give? What type of concessions will the U.S. give? And really, what does this relationship, if you will, look like 6 months down the road here? Because nothing is going to change next week, next month. These are going to be a long-term trade talks with China. There's no question about it. Where I get a little bit more nervous is because China is such a big buyer of Brazilian and Argentina beans. Where does our relationship go moving forward? Are we going to try to hold China to the coals a little bit? And hey, are you going to abide by that Phase 1 trade deal, the original one that Trump had when he was in office the first go around? So I think that's probably what I'm looking forward to the most here in these trade talks.
Okay, so for our viewers today, Nebraska ag producers, in particular the grain farmers right now, short term, we have to have trading partners. But long term, do you think we as a country need to be looking more at our long-term possibilities for how we can take advantage of and use corn and soybeans, I suppose more so soybeans in particular, long term?
Yeah, I think that we can't rely on one major buyer to have 50% of our market share. That's not going to work in any business model. And again, we need to have domestic policies in place that pushes the renewable biodiesel, probably more ethanol side of things. Because when you look at how big a competitor Brazil has gotten over the last 5 to 10 years, they're, I hate to say it, more or less eating our lunch when it comes to the export business. And we're still going to be exporting stuff, but we're not going to be exporting the type of stuff we've been doing, 5 years ago. So we need more domestic policies that focus on the domestic producer and not reliant so much on this export business. That export business is going to be there, but we need some other avenues for our producers here, especially Nebraska producers, that we can utilize our products here at home.
It seems like there is some groundwork that's been laid with new crushing plants and so forth that have been in place over the past few years. But things like sustainable aviation fuel, we haven't seen the policies, in particular the tax credits, follow suit, and perhaps what you've hinted chance it added during the Trump administration that could come to fruition?
I certainly hope so. I think this administration is probably going to be a little bit more friendly on those type of regards and probably less focused on the electrical side of things.
Okay. Let's talk about corn for a second. Tell us where we're at right now and what you're watching in terms of technical support levels, where that market could be going.
Yeah, I think next week with the WAS report, May is usually a time frame where we get those new supply and demand numbers, and that's usually when the market likes to bottom and run into that seasonal high in the early parts of June. I think with the managed money has really sold off here quite a bit, that they've given us some more or less, they got plenty of ammo in the tank here if the weather continues to persist and be dry. I mean, I think Nebraska is the bullseye spot for dryness right now across the country. But if that persists or even moves into Iowa, I think there's looking at some pretty good opportunities yet this summer, into that June, July, August time frame where, you know what, we still going to be looking at this huge yield number from the USDA. Take that with a grain of salt. If we factor in some weather, that 170, 175 may be a more likely number we can use for corn. And then we got to be able to reward these rallies when they come and probably be aggressive if the weather models do change.
Similar story or different for soybeans?
Soybeans, fundamentals are not all that great, but it's being led by the optimism of soy oil. Beans are in a precarious spot. I mean, we're seeing some pretty good demand right now from the Mexicans. That's always good to see because they're not usually big buyers of beans right now. So if we have some weather issues, a new crop, we're not going to get these acres. We have some weather. I do think beans can move higher, but likewise with corn, about every 50 to 60, 70 cents in beans, you're going to be wanting to reward that.
Mm-hmm. You brought up weather a couple of times, obviously, both in relation to corn and soybeans. Nebraska, the bullseye for that. You've shared some longer term, some seasonal outlooks for moisture, and it doesn't look pretty for the western corn belt, not only Nebraska, but also extending into Iowa, based on the models I've seen. What's your biggest concern weather-wise over the next month or two?
Well, Nebraska, obviously, we have irrigation, and irrigation is only as good as the subsoil moisture. And we have a lot of tenants that are running pivots right now just to put herbicide on, just to get the corn coming up. So that's my concern, is if Nebraska runs hot and dry for a long period of time, those pivots are only going to be so good. And so if that stretches into Iowa, where we don't have as much irrigation, that's the market where the market's going to take note of that. And that's where we're going to hopefully get our seasonal balances and rallies we need to reward.
Mm-hmm. You talked about managed money a few seconds ago. Bring me up to speed how they're positioned right now, corn and soybeans.
Well, as those managed monies, those are as of a Tuesday. Okay. So right now they're probably about 20,000 still long. I mean, I've seen some estimates. Maybe they're even right now. So again, like I said, there is plenty of ammo if they want to get back long this market in a more aggressive manner. Same thing with the wheat market. They're aggressively short wheat here. How they unwind those short positions could be a good factor for corn moving higher. Same thing with the beans. Funds, momentum type traders are pretty max short right now, in my opinion.
Coming up next week on Market Journal, we'll be sitting down with Jeff Peterson to get his thoughts on the grain markets and all the developments that'll happen over the next week. Well, passing a farm from one generation to the next is never a simple task, but every success story starts with a couple of courageous choices. Scott Kincaid and his son farm together near Hartington, Nebraska. One way that they've made their partnership work is by launching a new business venture, Kincaid Agri-Spray, a custom spraying and drone enterprise that's helping them diversify their farming operation. It's an example of how innovation and teamwork can bring the next generation into the farming fold. And you can read this full story in the latest issue of the Nebraska Farmer. We move along now on Market Journal. It is time to get a check of weather with Nebraska Extension ag climatologist Eric Hunt. Eric, we've had some great weather when it comes to planting over the past week, but most people I've been visiting with are saying they need rain and need it pretty desperately at this point. Any chance of some falling over the next few days?
Thanks, Bryce. The short answer to that question is no, unless you live in portions of the Panhandle. Ridging will be dominant here across the north-central United States here for the weekend and the early portion of this next week. That's going to mean relatively sunny skies, warm temperatures, hot temperatures. I think we're going to probably have at least a chance of getting the 90s for everybody at least once or twice the next couple of days. And with the tighter pressure gradient across this portion of the country, we're going to see relatively breezy conditions. It also means relatively high fire danger levels will persist, particularly across portions of central and western Nebraska during the afternoon hours through Tuesday and probably into Wednesday. By Wednesday, we are looking at a trough moving into the western and north central United States. That does mean a chance of moisture for at least the western portion of the Panhandle, or at least western and northern portions of the Panhandle. WPC does show at least maybe a chance of getting a half-inch of rain into the panhandle portion of the Sandhills. With this trough down here in the southeast, I don't think we're necessarily going to have the moisture return. That's going to be optimal for getting good precipitation here across the Front Range and High Plains. So I'm a little bit skeptical of some of these precipitation totals from WPC. Nevertheless, I do think we should see some precipitation in the panhandle Tuesday night into Wednesday. There may also be a slight chance of some precipitation across the eastern portion of the state on Wednesday with a cold frontal passage, but I am not anticipating anything falling from the sky in the eastern two-thirds of the state for the next 7 days at this time. That will change maybe as we head toward this next weekend. So models are starting to coalesce around there being some troughing moving into the central U.S. as we head into the weekend. That will bring a chance of showers and storms for everybody in this region, particularly central and eastern Nebraska getting to western Iowa. There looks to be a pretty good chance of moisture as we head into Saturday and next Sunday into the week after next. And again, the CPC is relatively bullish on precipitation being above average through this period from May 15th to the 21st. I also think as we head toward the end of this period, we're going to see temperatures probably fall back to at least at or below seasonal levels for the majority of the state. Again, precipitation last week or so been very sparse, almost non-existent here across eastern Nebraska. We did pick up some decent precipitation across portions of the panhandle earlier in the week. Very spotty precipitation otherwise here across western Nebraska. We are starting to run some very significant precipitation deficits here, though, across a lot of central Nebraska. Some places up here have had almost no rain in the last 30 days. And starting to run some sneaky precipitation deficits down here in southeastern section of the state as well. Again, we've seen with the lack of precipitation, especially this time of year, starting to really accumulate those deficits. We did see a massive expansion of severe drought across south central and into portions of northeastern Nebraska, with the introduction of extreme drought here across Elgin and other parts of northeastern Nebraska. Rangelands are in very poor shape across pretty much the entire state. Soil moisture is almost non-existent here across a lot of western and central Nebraska. Still okay in pockets of the east, but certainly not great for this time of year. Soil temperatures right now are currently holding mostly in the 60s across the state. And this is the temperature precipitation roundup for the week ending May 3rd, 2025. Back to you, Bryce.
All right, thank you very much for that update, Eric. We do appreciate it. Finally, today we're going to be heading out to North Platte, where Nebraska Extension's Irrigation Water Management Lab is helping producers there make the most of their limited water resources. Based at the West Central Research, Extension, and Education Center, this lab is working to support efficient, smart irrigation strategies. And here's the best part of it. If you cannot come to them, they'll come right to you. We recently caught up with a team to learn how their mobile irrigation testing lab is helping producers improve irrigation efficiency right in their own fields.
Basically, when I went around and asked producers, how do you irrigate? So some of them were telling me that, it's based on experience. They know at different stages when the crop needs water. So based on that experience they have, because some of them have irrigated over 10 years, they know what they're doing. So, but then I was like, do you have anything that you put in the field, maybe like any technology of sorts that can tell you, okay, this is how much water I have in the field? So they're like, yeah, we've heard about technology, but we have not had a chance of trying some of those technologies in our fields. I was like, maybe we need to actually be able to access those technologies and then take them to their fields, and then we're able to start that conversation of how they can use them and how these technologies can help them to be able to maximize their use, but at the same time they're able to reduce how much they're pumping from the groundwater, because we have seen some parts of Nebraska where we're having issues of declines in groundwater. So the biggest goal when I go to see a producer is to learn from them first, to understand, how they are actually, in my perspective or in my area of expertise, how do they irrigate their crop? When do they know that, this is X amount of water needed by the crop? And also understanding their needs, because, I might be knowing the science, why they need something, but I need to understand, is that the solution that they need? So basically, in a nutshell, I go hear from them, learn from them, and identify the needs. So the mobile irrigation testing lab is for any producer in West Central Nebraska, but also we are not only tied in Western Nebraska, but across Nebraska. Where there's land that is irrigated, we can reach, because the idea is how do we bring the technology closer to producers so that they can be able to utilize data to manage the resource, to manage irrigation. So the idea is how do we make sure that producers are using data to inform their irrigation decisions. So the thing is, it is free testing. We don't charge them any money for them to try out any technology. They just have to tell us which kind of technology they want to test, and then we go ahead and deal with the industry or the company that is having that technology. So the other idea of mobile irrigation testing lab is how do we narrow that gap, between the consumer that needs the technology and the industry that is making the technology. From my experience, we started this program last year. Producers have really been nice to us, So what I do, basically, I first give them a call, hey, can I come today? Because, they're busy. Producers are busy in the summer, and that's where we do the work. That's when we put in the technology for them to use it. So we make a call, and then they invite us to their homes, and then we talk. And then, we get them on board with a mobile testing lab program. Something to add is that maybe for producers, we need to be mindful of how we're using the resource, because as we've seen that there's now a growing trend of declines in Nebraska, but also there's an issue of nitrates. So how do we balance the inputs, but water being the driving factor? Because if you don't put on the right amount of water needed by the crop and you put on excessive, then that extra water is going to wash out the fertilizer from the root zone where you're supposed to manage it, out of the root zone into the vador zone, and eventually it ends up into our groundwater. So we need to be really careful on how we are managing irrigation.
Thanks to the team at West Central for hosting the Market Journal crew. As always, there's something interesting to learn at those research and education sites. Well, that is going to do it for this week's edition of Market Journal. As a reminder, if you missed one of our stories, we invite you to check out Market Journal on YouTube and follow the team on social media, where you can join in on the conversation and stay in the loop. We hope to see you right back here next time. But until then, I'm Bryce Duskett, wishing you a safe and productive week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.